Hey internet, gamers and tech lovers, welcome to my first ever GameKudos video. In this video, I'll be bringing together everything I know about the next PlayStation and what I think people are missing, my opinion and my analysis. This is the PlayStation 5 Hotpot, so let's talk tech. So, in short, Sony PlayStation is in rude health. They're leading the pack in this generation, and most importantly the games, especially the first party games, consistently impress and delight. There are so many talented and venerated games developers that make up Sony Studios. It's really a strong area for Sony. It's approaching what Nintendo has done for its own IP, in my humble opinion. If you're a bean counter, the numbers don't lie. A total of 106 million PS4s have sold as of December 2019. That took 7 years. It's strong when compared to the PS2 as well. That sold 155 million units in its lifetime between 2000 and 2013. How did they get in this position?
In addition to creating an amazing library of new titles on PlayStation 4, we're equally focused on delivering what gamers want most, without imposing restrictions or devaluing their PS4 purchases. For instance, PlayStation 4 won't impose any new restrictions on the use of PS4 gamers. Guess that's a good thing. We believe in the model that people embrace today with PlayStation 3 and continue to demand. Just heard you there. When a gamer buys a PS4 disc, they have the rights to use that copy of the game. They can trade in the game at retail, sell it to another person, lend it to a friend, or keep it forever. In addition, PlayStation 4 disc-based games don't need to be connected online to play. Or for any type of authentication. If you enjoy playing single-player games
Simply put, Sony were game-centric, prioritizing game creators, and they were pro-consumer, providing a platform in PS4 with enough power to host great games and a feature set that made gaming immediate, easy and social. Of course, some Microsoft missteps along the way with the Xbox One made it a lot easier for Sony. Unlike its predecessor, it was easier to develop for, and familiar because of its PC-like architecture. This is encapsulated by the time to triangle measure, which is something that Mark Cerny discussed in the Road to PS5 talk. Described as the time required to code graphical systems at a level that the hardware is capable of. In layman's terms, it means how quickly developers can get up to speed with a new console. To emphasize the stark contrast between the last generation, the current generation and next generation, here is the time to triangle for these different generations. In a world where it can cost hundreds of millions to develop AAA titles, making a platform easy to use is surely something every platform owner is aiming for. But what were the cornerstones of the PS4 launch? Well, they focused on the gamer and making pro-consumer decisions around used games and online. going back to the days of the original PlayStation and being developer friendly, 1 to 2 months for its time to triangle, increasing memory to 8 GB as opposed to the original 4, which we understand was a developer ask. Social and quality of life features like share, suspend, resume and background downloads, which don't get a lot of airtime, but I think are important to the overall experience of using a console. The change in technical design and move to AMD x86 CPU and Radeon GPU architecture brought with it alignment to PC hardware and also brought the consoles closer together. We shouldn't assume these were standard off-the-shelf parts, but they were less exotic than console gamers had been used to. However, in my view, the move was good for the games industry as a whole, as it reduced development complexity and the need to support multiple different architectures across the platforms. One noteworthy point to make was that the PS4 has significantly more memory bandwidth. It ran GDDR5 at 176 GB a second, which amounted to a 2.5x advantage over the Xbox One. This, in my view, was the biggest technology advantage the PlayStation had, not the T-flop or clock speed. I've included the PS4 specs should you be interested. Let's be honest, next gen really didn't start very well for Sony. A couple of wide interviews and the PlayStation 5 logo shown at CES didn't exactly set the world alight. A deep dive role to PS5 remarked Sony, whilst very informative, was really aimed at the developer audience at GDC, rather than the wider community. The PS5's T-flop number and approach with variable frequency dominated the conversation, which is a real shame. A lot of good information was just lost in the noise after the event. It was a really good presentation, timed badly and probably in response to earlier Xbox Series X announcements. There's a general misconception with T-flops as third measure for graphics power. A T-flop speaks to compute. It's one, not the only indicator. For example, an AMD Vega 64 has 12 T-flops of compute. The Nvidia 1080 has 9 T-flops of compute. Does anyone believe the Vega 64 runs games significantly better than a 1080? Even with a 20 to 30% increase in T-flops, the performance of the Vega 64 is similar to the GTX 1080. Other differences such as clock speeds, memory speeds and bandwidth, and architecture also play a part in the overall performance, not just raw T-flops. Sony kept silent, allowing the internet to go unchecked and Microsoft to control the next generation narrative. Why? Either by luck or in a premeditated move, Epic debuted Unreal Engine 5 in May, running on PS5. This was a vastly impressive interactive tech demo. It reminded me of the PlayStation tech demos of old, the T-Rex, Alfred Molina, Unreal Engine 4, and of course rubber ducks. Two key features were showcased: Looming, the global illumination lighting effects, and what I thought was the star of the show, Nanite, which allowed detailed movie level assets to be used in game. In short, the level of graphics looked astounding, truly next gen. Subsequently, Sony had invested $250 million in Epic for a minority stake. To keep it real, Epic is worth billions, not millions. From that point, Sony shared information about the DualSense controller with its haptic feedback, adaptive triggers, built-in mic and speaker. One notable change is the create button, which replaces share, and I'm interested to see how Sony integrates this with the PlayStation UI and games. Shortly after that, Sony finally brought cover in June for the PlayStation Future of Gaming reveal. We finally saw games that gave us a glimpse of what the next gen could deliver, the potential of the SSD, and finally the form factor and design of the console. And as everyone knows, it's big and white, and basically has the same design language as the PSVR headset. Ratchet & Clank gameplay demonstrated what's possible with the SSD, dense and detailed worlds, great particle and lighting effects. A great variety of games were shown off. Gran Turismo 7 was what you expected. Kena, Bridge of Spirits, Little Devil Inside, Oddworld, Soulstorm impressed me. Horizon looked wonderful, but it's unclear how much of it was actual gameplay footage as opposed to cutscenes. Many other titles were showcased that I've not mentioned, and as an event to show off why you want a next gen console, it was solid, a B+. But it just left me wanting to see more, and much more gameplay to boot. It also demonstrated that the first generation of PS5 games would include 4K, real-time ray tracing, and 60 frames per second, though not necessarily at the same time. The initial run-up to PS5 launch was shaky, but there's been a strong showing recently, showing kick-ass games really works. Sony was certainly helped by some underwhelming Microsoft events and a less than stellar showing of Halo. None of this has been helped by what's happening in the world. These are unprecedented times. Consoles are designed with value in mind. Historically, they follow a different path to traditional PC hardware. Think RISC CPUs used in the original PlayStation and PS2, and the Cell processor in PS3. Even Xbox 360 used a custom PowerPC processor, and the N64 had silicon graphics hardware traditionally used for film. Hardware is usually much more exotic and custom, as consoles have a very specific use case: games. We only recently moved to x86 and GPU architecture that's closer to what we see in modern PCs. Architecturally, in the current gen, both PlayStation 4 and Xbox One were very similar, both using AMD Jaguar based CPUs and GPUs based on GCN. Sure, there were some differences and customizations, like asynchronous compute. However, the base consoles were largely similar. In the next generation, we're seeing a return to the exotic. Even though they are based on AMD Zen 2 and RDNA 2, consoles are not multi-purpose devices. They have specific use cases, and we're seeing more fixed function hardware in their design. Ultimately, you're squeezing as much performance out of what you have. It has to be efficient, and using brute force solutions just isn't always viable from the cost perspective. For me, it's really exciting. I love clever and efficient solutions that allow consoles to punch above their weight. Even in the PC space, we're seeing innovative solutions like NVIDIA DLSS2. You don't need native 4K, but your upscale gives you the same image quality and better frame rates, and in some cases even better image quality. Sony has spent a lot of time and money on its SSD technology. You can't exactly evangelize the virtues of a fast SSD easily. People get much more excited over GPU, CPU, clock speed, T-flops, cores, CUs, Full HD, 4K, etc. That's how we've differentiated gaming hardware for a while. It's probably a real surprise to many people that storage is such a difference maker in the next gen. But a fast SSD was the #1 ask for developers, according to Mark Cerny. So the experts in the room are asking for this. We really should assume the impact of it is going to be game changing, literally. At the basic level, the fast SSD will solve some really obvious problems with the current gen. A lot of people are thinking in terms of ultra fast loading and elimination of load screens. It feels like a throwback to the days when consoles had cartridges, which amounted to a memory card. Hopefully we'll find a new home for those handy game tips we'll be losing very soon. However, I think the true benefits are increased levels of detail and richness a game can have with the PS5 SSD. The SSD acts like a secondary pool of memory, and in fact compared to DDR2 memory speeds. To put this into context, I built a PC with DDR2 to play Crysis back in the day. In this scenario, the actual GDDR6 memory can be maximised to hold assets for the next few seconds rather than the next few minutes. Let me summarise and add my own opinion to the information that Mark Cerny shared in his talk. The PS5 hard drive loads 1 GB in 20 seconds. This includes seek and zlib decompression. The PS4 memory contains data for the next 30 seconds of gameplay. This approach meant you needed to preempt what would happen in-game, and can be wasteful as memory contains data you may not use straight away, if at all. It's front-loading data and assets and caching it in memory, compensating for the lack of drive speed. The PS5 SSD loads 1 GB in 0.27 seconds, no seek required. The PS5 memory contains data for the next 1 second of gameplay. Most of the memory is in use for the game. It's much more reactive to game events and gets data just in time. The speed of the SSD means less memory is wasted, as less or no front loading of data assets is required. Aligned with 6 levels of priority, the PS5 SSD allows data fetches to be triggered by gameplay events in real time. In short, this means more memory for the game right now, which could mean high quality textures and audio, large amounts of geometry for immediate use. At minimum, it means we'll have less LOD popping, but that's just my guess. So Sony, must be using just a fast M.2 PCI-4 NVMe drive. What a mouthful. I mean, they even allow you to expand the storage using one of these devices. We need to think about the PS5 SSD solution as more than a drive. It's a whole hardware solution, including custom chips to rapidly move data into memory when the game needs it. Sony wants to address all the bottlenecks. It's not just about the drive's raw throughput. That's only part of the puzzle, and the reason why adding an SSD to your PS4 never gives the increase in performance you expect. You're not dealing with the other bottlenecks. Sony are throwing an unprecedented amount of hardware and customization at the problem. It looks like no other consumer level SSD. We're seeing a continued alignment with PC and AMD architecture. However, there are more customizations this generation to get more bang for your buck. The PS5 SSD could be a game changer, which the PC will need time to catch up to or even mitigate using memory. Sony describing PS5 using variable frequency was a mistake. It just implies you're running at a lower base clock speed most of the time, but can burst to the boost clock speed for only a short time. It won't work the same way as a PC CPU boost. The GPU and CPU run at a continuous boost, which allows a console to run at max clock speed most of the time. It's designed to maintain its max boost for either the CPU, GPU or both. The PS5 will have a set power budget for the GPU and CPU. However, it will divert power away from the CPU to the GPU based on GPU activity. This also happens in the opposite direction, should more CPU power be required. Though it's not clear to me whether the power diverted means the CPU or GPU can run above the max clock speed, or it runs consistently at the max clock speed. Power delivery is linked to clock speed. However, it's not linear, and a drop of 10% of power translates to a few percent decrease in clock speeds. A version of AMDs Smartshift is used to achieve this. Based on information from AMD, they expect laptops that use Smartshift to increase performance up to 14%, which I will assume is the best case scenario. What's also interesting is that Smartshift will adjust power within 2 milliseconds. Based on this, GPU and CPU power shifts could happen frequently and often, as the need arises from scene to scene or frame to frame. The power budget of the PS5 has a set limit. It's linked to the cooler's ability to dissipate heat. The thermal density for GPU and CPU is the same, at their respective clock speeds. The thermal density is how easy or difficult the hardware can be cooled. This makes the heat output predictable and therefore manageable via the cooling hardware. If the PS5's version of Smartshift works well, and the cooler does its job, this continuous boost approach should work well. To reiterate, it's not for running max clock speeds for a short time, rather it runs at the max clock speed most of the time, for a sustained and predictable level of performance. AMD designed Smartshift to squeeze every ounce of performance from laptops. In theory, lower spec GPUs will deliver similar performance to higher end parts. If it can do the same for the PS5, there's no reason to complain, but a lot will depend on the cooler. PS5 juggles evolution, revolution, and chases new dreams. That's faster AMD chips, tight integration with the SSD, and potentially best-in-class 3D audio to you and I. The console contains significantly more custom and fixed function hardware. The CPU uses Zen 2 architecture. It's a custom chip with 8 cores, 16 threads. It runs at 3.5 GHz. What's really interesting is that the CPU contains customization for backwards compatibility, specifically around the timings, to make it behave like the PS4's Jaguar cores. Clearly you don't bake backwards compatibility into the hardware unless you're taking it seriously. The CPU is also supported by a lot of fixed function hardware for I/O, data decompression and audio, which would normally take cycles away from the processor. It just means the CPU has more power at its disposal more of the time. Moving on to the graphics part, the GPU uses an RDNA 2 based custom design. 36 CUs, 2.23 GHz, delivering a total of 10.28 teraflops. On paper, it's a narrow GPU designed for low latency and clock time. Why low latency? Well, here are some quotes from William Daly, an NVIDIA chief scientist. Accelerator design is guided by cost. Arithmetic is free, particularly low precision. Memory is expensive. Communication is prohibitively expensive. Accessing even a small memory array costs way more than doing an operation. And a lot of what we think of memory cost today is really communication cost. Cost in this case is energy usage, not money. Based on what Mark Cerny presented in the road to PS5, you can see the custom IO chip works with the GPU and its caches. It's all designed to get as much off the SSD into system memory and used by a GPU as efficiently as possible. It's a continuous process. It feeds memory for the next second of gameplay, not the next 30 seconds. It's next gen game asset streaming. The PS5 GPU does have a new unit called the Geometry Engine. This engine allows triangles and other primitives to come under full programmatic control, stated Mark Cerny. This allows for better optimization, like removing off-screen vertices and triangles, and it will be able to create geometry on the fly as it's rendered. Historically, software handles vertices, i.e. points in space, and hardware handles geometry, such as triangles that are formed from vertex data. As these are separate phases, there are limitations to the level of control and optimization you can apply. And I think the objective of the geometry engine is to implement primitive shaders, which combine both vertex and geometry phases of the graphics pipeline. I would be very surprised if the Unreal Engine 5 demo didn't use the geometry engine, looking at how impressive and dense the world was. To explain the advantages, I'll use a product production line analogy. Let's say you have 3 steps. Quality assurance, where you check the product. Packaging, where you put it in a box. Delivery, where you send it to the customer. You would never put the quality assurance after packaging. Why package a defective product? It's just a waste of effort. In a GPU graphics pipeline, you have a number of shaders, each one taking some input and throwing out output to the next shader. Usually the vertex shader is the first part of the pipeline, and this sends vertex data or point in space to the geometry shader. However, the vertex shader won't know what vertices are visible on the screen, and the geometry shader takes all the input, processes it before it discards non-visible triangles. Wasteful. Therefore, we combine both shaders for more performance, efficiency and control. It's an oversimplification, as there are more shaders in the pipeline I've not talked about. Features like the geometry engine and primitive shaders were introduced in AMD's Vega architecture. It's not clear if it was widely used or even a working part of Vega. It's possible that the geometry engine and primitive shaders in the PS5 may be an iteration on what was in Vega and potentially a fully realised version. And yes, in theory, primitive shaders sound very similar to mesh shaders used in Xbox Series X and DirectX, but I can't be sure if it's actually one of the same. That might be something for a separate video. The PS5 GPU supports AMD's real-time ray tracing solution. BVH acceleration exists and was confirmed for some time now. The only thing I can say about ray tracing is look at the games shown in the Future of Gaming event. We see examples of ray tracing, mostly reflections and some shadows. Outside of the event, Quantum Error demonstrates ray traced lighting and shadows, and the developers are aiming for a 4K 60 FPS presentation. The GPU in the PS5 is built for low latency and contains most of the RDNA 2 feature set. Some features are unconfirmed like variable rate shading, and some are either new or iterated from older architecture, like the geometry engine and primitive shaders. It's not the GPU with the biggest T-flop or CPU count, but it just feels built to work with the PS5 SSD and I/O controller to stream in geometry and graphics assets rapidly. Audio on the PS5 sounds incredible. 3D audio that can support hundreds of high-fidelity sound sources in theory, an audio capability that's a cut above even Dolby Atmos in some areas. An inclusive 3D audio for all mantra, with audio which is tailored to how individuals physically listen. It's aspirational and it feels like a massive summit to scale. To achieve this, Sony are throwing a significant amount of hardware at it. The PS5 uses a GPU core for sound processing, which has been customized to behave like a PS3 Cell SPU, which is well suited to processing audio. There are no caches, and it's designed to use DMA to move data. This is the Tempest engine. The Tempest engine equates to the power of the PS4 Jaguar CPU, which is approximately 100 G-flops, and outside of audio, it will be interesting to see what else the chip can be used for. It does need some babysitting, as left unchecked, the Tempest engine could consume 20% of the PS5's bandwidth. What is fascinating is the use of HRTFs, which uses the biology of the head and ear to work out how an ear receives audio. The more personalised the HRTF, the more realistic the sound. Sony has measured the HRTF of hundreds of people, but initially the PS5 will allow you to choose one HRTF profile out of 5. It will be interesting to see how HRTF use develops over time, if the number of selectable HRTFs increase, and how HRTFs become more accurate for each individual. The technology and science are all well and good, but does it deliver? Audio with presence and locality amounts to high immersion in-game. Ever watched a horror film with the sound muted? You know what I mean. Imagine the immersion in a war zone with multiple sources of gunfire and explosions, or the effects of using this tech in a scene with a stampeding herd of animals. It's not the PlayStation's first foray into 3D audio. PSVR had its own implementation, and it's not difficult to believe that the Tempest engine might have been developed with the next PSVR in mind. In short, we're getting backwards compatibility with PS4 games. Sony have confirmed this officially. Sony are testing these games as part of the backwards compatibility effort. It will take time, and that's fair. No company is going to build customizations into their CPU to support it unless they plan to go big. Potentially getting better frame rates and higher resolution is also on the cards, but let's see some evidence. There is no news on PS1, PS2, PS3 backwards compatibility, and it's not out of the realms of possibility that this could be offered via PS Now. It's early days for Sony, and I don't think we can expect the rich backwards compatibility of Xbox. They had an original Xbox game running with HDR in 4K. My old Xbox collection would love this. It's very cool. What I would like to happen is for Sony to improve the backwards compatibility over time. It's a good prosumer move, and it's certainly for the gamers. The feature set Sony is putting into the PS5 could be revolutionary. It's underpinned by using that SSD as a large pool of memory. The design of the console is about efficiency, eliminating bottlenecks and low latency. It's not about brute forcing solutions, though some people may argue given the spec of the SSD. The design of the console sounds balanced and efficient. It pushes PlayStation forward in multiple areas. Visuals get an upgrade every generation, but this time audio, controls and touch are also getting more love and attention. Like everyone, I'm still curious about the price, unannounced games, game studio purchases, backwards compatibility, the OS and UI. What does the create button do? How will the DualSense controller make an impact? Will we get the console in different colours? How will Sony manage HRTFs going forward? Changes to services like PS Plus and PS Now, if any. In short, there's a ton of things we don't know, including what's not been disclosed about the technical specification. A spec bump might be possible. It's been done before. Sony wants you to experience 3D audio without the outlay of specialized audio devices. I actually think chasing the dream of 3D audio for all is quite a prosumer move, as is allowing PlayStation owners to upgrade the storage without a proprietary drive, assuming off-the-shelf devices work well with PS5. Sure, Sony is still actively paying for content exclusives, but to be honest, they're a business. First-party exclusives exist for all consoles, whether it's Nintendo, Microsoft or Sony. Is that anti-consumer? We don't want a complacent Sony. We want a Sony who faced stiff competition from Microsoft during the 360 and PS3 era. And yeah, I know PS3 ultimately sold more units. We want a Sony who wants to push boundaries, innovate and drive home the advantages from the current generation. In truth, Sony has to win. Their games and network group powers their business. SSDs, clock speed, T-flops and specs aside, we've seen some evidence that PS5 does pack a punch. Ratchet & Clank and Horizon look impressive. The Unreal Engine 5 demo was a stellar technical showcase, but we need more gameplay and more reasons to purchase the console day one. As much as I love tech specs, let's have the games take centre stage. It's all about the games. Guys, that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it and found it informative. I'll post any links I use for research in the description. Please like and subscribe if you want to support the channel, and comment, as I'm interested in hearing your views about the PS5 and the content of this video. Until next time, you guys have a stellar day.